Hello and welcome back to Fighting Crime Forum 2024, live from Warsaw Stock Exchange. Warm welcome to everyone who has just joined us and are still with us, and welcome to all the participants online. Ahead of us, there's a final presentation of the day, and for that, I'd like to ask you to welcome with me on stage Lucy Havens, VP Marketing from South, who will lead the great discussion about collaboration and not competition, how fintechs and banks are sharing intelligence to beat financial crime. Very hot topic. Lucy, please join me on stage.
Hello, everyone. I'm conscious that I'm just between you and the end of your day now, so we're going to try and make this as exciting for you as possible. So I'd like to welcome my panelists to the stage, please. Can I have Magda from Taylor Wasing, Daniel from Binance, Siri from Coupang, and Nick from Societe Generale. Thank you very much, everyone. So as Natalia said, we're here today to talk about collaboration, not competition. So we've heard a lot today about information sharing, but we've heard a lot from a regulatory and a legal perspective, which is great. But I think regulation or the legal side of things shouldn't really be the driver here. The criminals, they are sharing information, and they're sharing it very, very fast. And the reason that they're sharing it fast is because they don't have the regulations in the way, right? They collaborate. They don't compete with each other. They share information. They even share information about how they do crime. They sell that to each other, like crime in a box. So, we should be sharing more information with each other to fight financial crime. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not just going to talk about how to share information. We're going to actually talk about, exactly how it's being done already today. So the first question I'd love to discuss, actually, and I've heard three words through the course of this afternoon that are used interchangeably. So I've heard data, I've heard information, and I've heard intelligence sharing, but they all mean very different things, and in different contexts, they can mean very different things. So that's the first thing I'd love to discuss with you guys today, is, in your view, what is the difference between data, information, and intelligence when it comes to sharing? So Magda, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I understand that it is very important to share the information about exit clients and exit transactions. But what is even more important is that to be one step before of the in front of the criminals, it is very important also to share information about the patterns that are visible on the market, and sometimes from the perspective of one single financial institution, it is difficult to recognize those patterns. So we need to share the information about how the criminals are working. That the thing that was mentioned at the first panel today, the KYC, meaning know your criminal, is very, very important. Of course, some of this information are shared, for example, in the European and national risk assessment, but it is very usually too late to know the patterns because they are simply outdated in the moment we get to know about them from the regulations or from the risk assessments. So to have the platform to exchange views on how the criminals are working is very, very crucial.
Hey, Daniel.
Yeah, so going back to your initial question, I'm a very practical person, so I'll try to translate it to the most obvious things, right? So data is raw, basically raw data. Information is something that was subject, from my perspective, to some kind of analysis, and intelligence is something that tells a story. So translating that into, for example, transactions, right? Data is just a drop-down extract transactions. Here you go, this is the data. Information would be something more substantiated, for example. Okay, add to that the summary. This is the amount of transactions in, out. This is that additional data. But intelligence is something that tells a story, that tells about the patterns, that tells a specific narrative connected to and is subject to very heavy analysis. And that's why usually we, when we file SAR, we say that's intelligence sharing, or So that I would divide it that way, but I also understand that on the end of the day, everybody is using those three things interchangeably.
Interesting. Thank you. Siri.
Does it work? Yeah, now it works. Well, I pretty much agree with what Daniel said. I, as a person who works in a bank, I say that the data is everything that we have about the client, that we have about the transaction, and there's no worth of sharing the data, because that doesn't give you anything. Why to share the data? But then there's the information, what I have about my client that is relevant for the other bank, or the information on the patterns, or the information that I see from the transaction. And then there's the intelligence. I don't have to share the information that I reported to the FIU about the client, but I can share the intelligence that, for example, yes, we share the same client. We have the suspicion that this person or this company uses front person. So this is the intelligence that I can share. So those are the slight differences.
We're all very busy people, right? Just give me the kind of the intelligence first, and then we can work backwards to the data if we need to. So, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, fully agree with sort of the distinction, but the sort of interlinked nature that's been expounded here already on data, information and intelligence. I think the other thing that needs to be understood with these three related aspects is as well, especially when we're looking, inevitably this discussion is going to go into conflicts with data protection and privacy laws. Data to me is something far more granular than information and than intelligence. And obviously that then, increases the identifiability of data subjects as well. That's the way I would look at it as well. So you go from data to information to intelligence, which can almost be entirely anonymized and can be very general about, as we said, trends, patterns, future directions, rather than data, but it really concerns the individual data subject usually.
Yeah, interesting that you just said that and used the word kind of anonymized then, because this is kind of where I wanted to go with the conversation. And somebody, it was said in the first panel discussion this morning about starting with the why. And I've heard a lot about data sharing, information sharing, about how we can share and what points of data that you use. But what I haven't heard a lot of is the why. Like you just said, we want to get to the kind of the trends and how we're solving challenges first. So, Siri, I'd love to come to you actually first on that. So how are you seeing information intelligence sharing happening, in your role? What kind of use case are you seeing where that intelligence is being shared, and how is it valuable?
Well, can I give an example, for example, where I was trying to share or receive some information through SWIFT from another country. And I sent them a request. I had a sanction hit, and I had to somehow whether eliminate it or then say this person might be sanctioned. It took me 15 weeks to get the reply. And the reply only said that we cannot share the information who our client is, but we can assure that this client is not sanctioned. Thank you for assuring, but actually you are providing terminal, card payment terminal to a company that is owned by Sberbank, and you're telling me that your client is not sanctioned. Why should I believe you? You didn't give me any information. Of course, I had filed the SAR by that time. I had canceled the transaction, and see how much work we all had to do. We had to send the SWIFT message. We had to wait the reply. We didn't get it. We sent notifications. We had to file the report. Somebody at the FIU had to go through it, had to reply whether I was applying sanctions correctly or not. Why? Why can't we share the information that would help us all throughout the European Union. And this is something that what we do in Estonia, that if we have, for example, a sanction hit, it's like the matter of minutes where we get the information from the other bank. Like, we are not trying to steal each other's customers. We are working at the second line of defense. We don't buy in clients. And as well with the intelligence information is that we often get requests of intelligence, or we do that. For example, when we have suspicions that the client might be lying about the source of wealth, well, whether he or she is related to somebody, or why the other bank account was ended, and so on, so that there's a lot of intelligence that we share with the banks, but there must always be a connection between those two banks. Like, I cannot just ask from another bank that, is Lucy your client? Of course they will say no. But there always have to be a link. And yes, I think that the criminals in Estonia, they already know that we share the intelligence, so they move to other banks, not even to our neighboring countries, but the next door from our neighbors.
I just wanted to jump in and say, I remember when I was doing it from a practical case and sharing or requesting data from other, not even other banks, but other countries. So when I was doing back in the day some investigation into the Russian laundromat, I could see that I was sending RFIs via SWIFT to the receiving banks, and they were like saying, no, we can't you tell anything, but we offboarded the customer, right? So actually you did, right? But that was a repeatable thing. I was in dozens of those, like in 60%, the action was already being done. But the interesting pattern was when I was sending, I saw the same customer holding, like, we see that he was exited at one point from one bank, moved to another in Montenegro or somewhere else, and I requested the same data, and they said, no, this is our customer, we don't share data, right? So we see that at one point they exited, and he moved just to another jurisdiction. But that's a challenge, and it's a very time-consuming process, and quite often you don't get the data that you need. So some things need to be done in order to protect the financial market, because basically that's a little bit of our job, right?
I remember years ago, and I'm probably showing my age a little bit here, but I remember watching a panel discussion. There was a CTO from a bank on there, and he was talking, the discussion was around cloud technology and whether it was a good thing. See, I told you I was showing my age. And he said, I don't believe in using the cloud for, kind of core banking systems and things like that. It's just not safe. And, we're not using the cloud in our bank. And then, somebody said, well, are you using, Google kind of Outlook or Google Mail or Outlook or, whatever for your email? Yeah, we are. Okay, well, you are using the cloud. Oh, yeah. So I think the same goes with information sharing. We're talking about it now as if it's something new that's happening. I guarantee somewhere in these departments, right, in the case of AML and fraud, there is some information sharing going on, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And jumping back to the point why we cannot share the data, this is a problem that AML regulations, or AML generally speaking, is always in a contradiction to data protection, and it is only not visible in context of data sharing, but for example in the context of access to the UBO registers, or in the context of conducting KYC. So this is not just a small part of points in which we see the contradiction. And of course it is not anything new. We now have already regulations in place which address the topic of data sharing. Unfortunately, these regulations are very different in each member state, which makes the data sharing even more difficult. The regulations in particular member states are also quite broad in this matter. For example, I can see that Daniel is smiling in mentioning about the Polish regulation, regulations, which in the context of the IML Act limits significantly the possibility to share data, for example, between the entities within one capital group, and also when not sharing within one capital group, there is a possibility to share the data. However, only when they are towards the same client and the same transaction, which of course it's a great problem, because this is a very rare situation when the criminals are using this pattern and setting the same exact person and in the same transaction. Also, there is a possibility to share data within envisaging in the Polish Banking Act in context of the banks. However, this is the good thing is that it concerns AML, so sharing data for AML purposes, and also for frauds. So this is a good point. The bad side of the regulation is that there is a catalog of entities with whom bank can share the data. The catalog is quite limited to financial institutions, mainly such as, for example, leasing or factoring entities. However, there are, for example, no insurers or no fintech companies within this catalog. So the regulation, especially, but in Poland, does not help usually to share the data, and the contradiction between data protection and AML purposes is quite strong in Poland. However, it is good that it has been recognized by the EU legislator. We have the multiple times mentioned Article 75 in the AML package. We also have some solutions in the PSR regulation concerning payment services. So it might be a possibility for us. However, I can see also some problems within the Article 75. I think that the practice will show how we will be able to use it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. From a practice point of view, or from a regulatory point of view, it's telling us that we can share information, but it's not saying what we can share and how. But then I suppose I'm going to come back to it again. It goes back to the why, doesn't it? It doesn't tell you why. And rightly so. We don't want it to tell us why. So, yeah, are there any more kind of like whys, any more case studies of where information is being shared?
Yeah, if I may, I mean, again, it's something that's come up throughout this event. You know, why are we actually doing what we do? Why do banks invest in financial crime compliance teams? Why are their service providers focused on this? And again, it's because organized crime, money laundering, corruption, terrorist financing causes a real harm to the economy, to people, and to society. And so in the end, why we're doing this is to curb that harm that is being committed on stakeholders within society. So that leads me to an interesting example where maybe data and information sharing could be leveraged a bit better. And it goes to the SAR regime, really, which is a very, you know, in a way, it's a very powerful infrastructure that's been developed to alert authorities as to goings on that might not be quite, you know, might not be quite white, might not be quite in compliance with the law. But the issue you get is because criminals use such complicated systems that it's often hard to spot. And because banks don't collaborate much on that, you oftentimes get very low quality SARs. So as an example, if you have a payment chain, and this is something that I've seen in my work as well, you know, a payment from a client gets bounced through a few different banks, correspondent banks, clearers, etc. One bank will reject the payment, it bounces back, and it will just come back with a message saying rejected due to internal policy. No other information whatsoever. Obviously, you can make an educated guess as to why. But what then ends up happening is you probably get 2 or 3 SARs filed potentially to the same FIU. Now, FIUs, for example, in the UK, they've come out and said, you know, you need to stop filing too many SARS. You need to file SARS where there's an actual suspicion. But what you shouldn't be doing is just SAR anything that looks a bit unusual in a sort of defensive mindset, because actually we get snowed under and we can't see the high quality SARS because we're so inundated with low quality SARS. If banks were able to cooperate, and fintechs as well, if they were able to cooperate a bit better on these sort of payments, for example, that could really have a real world effect in making FIUs a lot more effective in enforcement.
And also to add to that, right? We need to also remember why data sharing is important, because back in the days, it was like we had banks. The structure of the payment was straightforward, easy. The systems were more or less the same, but nowadays we have payment initiators, crypto exchanges, we've got ATM operators and other different types of service providers, and each of them hold a piece of evidence, a piece of the case. Not all data is transferable, not all data is visible. So that's one of the reasons why data sharing, clear technical regulations also, but data sharing is also needed to collaborate not only between different institutions, but different type of service providers. That's one thing. And the regulators is the second thing. I remember back in the days that it's more about public-private partnership and exchange, that one of the biggest UK banks had actually sent on an STA a person from the second line to the Metropolitan Police, worked closely with them. And I was like, first my question was, okay, is this legal and under the law? Can they operate shared data and things like that? But the second thought was, what an amazing effort in order to manage in a timely manner things that might be suspicious, because we know that it's very rare to freeze the funds. It's very rare to everyone is stacked with SAR investigations, alerts, and things like that. Very rarely there's an occasion when you can actually freeze the funds and do something with that. So this kind of close collaboration between the regulator or the police, law enforcement, and private sector is also needed. That's something that in EU isn't the standard, especially in Poland. But that's something that I feel in Poland needs to be more worked on.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, it's what just Daniel said and Magda pointed or brought out as well, that it's the cooperation with the public sector. We had a meeting yesterday with the Estonian FIU, which is done regularly just to get the feedback to our SARs and so on, and they told us at the end that, but it would be good as well if you would mention in your SARs if you have exchanged the information inside of Bridge, so that would give us some sort of idea that we might receive similar SARs from the other banks as well, so that they can create the connection straight away and they don't have to start looking possible points together. But another thing where you can share the information is kind of the proactive information sharing on fraud. And this is what we do a lot. Like, you don't have to wait until you discover in your backlog, in your somewhere in online monitoring alert that there has been a fraudster in your bank. But if you can share the information proactively, like, for example, what we do in Estonia, if I receive a message from another bank, we have a suspicion that this bank account in your bank has been used for fraud, then we can automatically, just by receiving the message, block the account so that no transactions are going out until somebody has looked into the client and made sure that the funds are not transferred through knowingly or unknowingly by our client, which is very helpful, and that has already stopped a lot of funds going through. And that actually has been one of the things that has initiated the more information sharing throughout the Baltic states, like with the other banks and fintechs. In Baltics, we share the information on fraudulent accounts, fraudulent payments. And it's been really active, and we have received really good and positive feedback on that.
Just quickly, I just wanted to, for clarification, Siri mentioned South Bridge there. So Bridge, and this is not a plug, but Bridge is the platform, the South's platform that is used to share intelligence. So just for clarification, sorry.
So one thing concerning why we should share the information, it is not only to more effectively address our obligations as obliging this institution, but also to be able to see the bigger picture. So money laundering or financial terrorism is an international crime, transnational crime. It is also a crime that usually criminals use multiple entities. So sometimes one entity cannot see the full picture. And this is why we should have the proactive approach that Siri talked about to be able to recognize the patterns ahead of something happened before.
Absolutely. Siri, as you were talking there a minute ago, you were talking about incoming payments. I have a question then around the difference between incoming payments and outgoing payments. Like, are they treated differently in how you would kind of share information?
When we share the information in Salv, in the Bridge platform, there's no difference. But when you use the Swift, for example, then usually you might receive some information on incoming payment, but in most cases you don't get anything back on the outgoing payment because they just say that, oh, we cannot share the information because of the bank secrecy. Well, once again, I'm not going to steal your client. I don't care. She lives on the other side of the world. I work at the second line of defense. I want to help my customer to make a payment, and you should want to help your customer to receive the payment. That's so easy. That's all about our own customers, just to make their life easier as well.
So on the 7th of October, we had in the UK, there was you've probably heard of the mandatory reimbursement rule for APP fraud. So this is where authorized push payment or bank impersonation fraud occurs, and the banks then have to fully reimburse the customers for the whole amount that the money's been stolen from their account. So Nick, I suppose for you, sort of as the British person there, but where would you see information sharing kind of in that case for APP fraud?
Well, again, goes back to the sort of central idea that there's many ways of information sharing. You know, there's obviously merit in sharing, you know, the names and sort of other relevant contact, other identifying information of the people actually perpetrating that fraud. There's also maybe relevance in sharing the victims, in that, you know, can you identify people that are more likely to be vulnerable to fraud? But there's also other potentially even more valuable ways of information sharing, and a lot of that has always been done. Actually, it's, you know, goes back to the point that it's not a new thing. Information sharing fora like the Wolfsburg Group, Egmont Group, and all that have existed for a long time, that allow banks to share with each other the approaches they take to combating financial crime. And a forum like that would be very useful for the different banks to actually figure out what the street is doing about APP fraud, how they are preventing it, how they're detecting it, how they're remediating it. Because again, criminals use arbitrage to commit crimes. They will figure out very quickly if one bank is lagging behind in their controls, in their framework, and they'll pounce on that. So if banks can effectively leverage these fora that they participate in anyway, to, you know, exchange ideas and to bring their systems up to scratch, that can go a long ways towards preventing and mitigating APP fraud as well.
I'd like to kind of hit or touch on a little bit of information sharing internally, between, I think a lot of banks, more the bigger banks, I suppose, have the kind of fraud and AML teams that sit separately. And I was talking to somebody at a conference yesterday who kind of alluded to the AML team being that little team in the corner over there. I don't really know much about what they do or whatever. But yeah, how can we use information sharing better kind of internally as well?
So that's a big challenge, especially in the big banks, right? So because we have different legislation for fraud, for AML, but everyone that does this job know that quite often the transaction that has been alerted for fraud, in a month it will be alerted by the AML team. Quite often that's the case, right? In the old systems, now it's a little bit maybe different. But first of all, it would be useful to share the data probably through one type of system for monitoring transactions and fraud. This is a savings of money, right? Two people don't need to look at the same case in different periods of time, right? Within a 1 month time span. But that's a little bit wider about data sharing and basically looking at the whole compliance environment as a system, because a lot of the things that are done by the fraud team, by the transaction monitoring team, by the sanction team, later on impact somehow the KYC team, because we need to, for example, do a refresh or request additional data or something else. Basically, this is all infrastructure, and we need to treat it as a system, not as separate islands, silos that operate somewhere in the corner there, right? So that's, I think, that the biggest challenge, because everything now is connected. We see a lot of cases that originate from identity fraud or card fraud, then it's transferred to money laundering because there are significant funds moving in and out for the accounts, maybe something sanctions related, so the sanctions team kicks in, and then you need to offboard the customer, so the KYC kicks in, right? So you need to look at it from a system perspective as a whole life cycle, and be able and think about data sharing in that respect.
It's really interesting you say that. Was Sal, we held an event back before the summer, and we were talking, we actually had an ex-criminal, financial criminal that came and presented that's now running an organization where they're using their lived experience for good, and he talked exactly about that from the criminal perspective. They don't sit there and wake up one morning and think, I'm going to commit a romance scam today or something. They just have their playbook, and they're criminals. They just do all of the different types of fraud interchangeably. Yet in the banks, we have everything kind of, sitting in its own department, thinking this is the criminal's going to sit in this department. How have you baked all of the kind of information sharing into your processes?
Well, probably we started asking as well, why? Why do we do that? Why do we need that? And I would say that it's quite easy. Why do we do that? This has been brought out so many times today that we cannot work in silos, that I want to have the information or you want to have the information. No, we want to give the best to our clients. We want to give the best to our society. We want to have, we don't want to fall into the gray zone by FATF evaluation and so on and so on. So why do we do that? And we don't want our financial system to be used by criminals. This is why we do that. So if you integrate the information sharing, first of all, internally in your own bank, kind of, you step out of the silo. That's the first step. And then you start sharing the information with other banks. We did that before the platform. We had an information exchange working group at the Estonian Banking Association. But it was all the information that had brought out here and there before anyway, so it wasn't really useful. So the idea of silo, I think that it's the idea of all the Estonian banks together that to find a fast way to information sharing. So we just kind of took it on board, and instead of asking, why do I really have to? Is it a burden? Do I have to hire a new person? No, it's just part of our daily life. I get the request on information for on sanctions, for example. It's just a second. It's like the online monitoring you do. You have the transaction stuck. you reply automatically. If you have a question on AML, then you treat it as offline monitoring alert, and you just deal with it. You share the information with your KYC teams, with your fraud teams, if you have the fraud information requests, and we meet regularly as well as banks and discuss positive sides, negative sides, on the information and intelligence sharing. We have made the common agreement between all the banks and Fintechs that are using the platform. What do we ask? When do we ask? Why do we ask? So that we wouldn't burden each other. It's kind of, it's the just the overarching agreement. And this is the way as well, for example, our public sector has joined. Like we have direct encrypted link with the interior intelligence police in Estonia, so that we can just share or ask information on the possible terrorist financing cases, so that we get it directly, or if they discover something, they send it directly to all the banks so that we would be aware of that there could be something. And recently as well, now the Tax and Customs Board joined, so that we can file SARS to them on trade sanction violations if we discover, or if we have suspicions, so that we would all be on the same ground. But at the same time, when I share the information with the, for example, with the Tax and Customs Board, of course the other banks don't see it. But kind of, and that makes it safe and secure as well. But if I see that there's another bank related to the same pattern, of course I notify the other bank as well that we have those suspicions. Have you looked into your client? Because we are not sure that the funds that are transferred to our bank are not from money laundering.
I love this, Sari, because I think once you do start sharing the information, intelligence, whatever, you know, I think it kind of opens up like lots of different possibilities, doesn't it? It's like a bit of a snowball effect. So I'm going to go a bit rogue and kind of off the questions for a minute, but look at the worry in their eyes. What I'm going to ask is, imagine I had a magic wand here and I could take all of those data privacy and regulatory concerns away from you, right? I know that might be hard for you, Magda. But if I could do that, and you had kind of, you know, this use case that you think in my job, make yourself really selfish for a minute. Like in my job, if I could share this information with other financial institutions, oh my goodness, the benefits. Yeah, what would that use case be? Do you want me to leave you to think for a minute? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm that imaginative, but well, I think that from the perspective of the AML regulations and their effectiveness, that would be a miracle. Then I'm really convinced that the AML regulations would be more efficient, and then the data sharing would open really a lot of possibilities, mainly in the field which I already discussed, seeing the full picture. So not worrying about data protection and banking secrecy definitely would help AML purposes. I'm not sure if it would be beneficial for the whole concept of regulatory issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Daniel, go on. I can see something bubbling here.
Like always. So for sure, one of the first impacts for sure will be the quality of the reports, the SARS, right? It would be way more significant, the information that the FIU would get in a more timely manner, right? Because how it usually looks in Poland, right? We report something to the regulator indicating the flow of funds, institutions, whatsoever. Then the FIU is reviewing when they will come to that, and then they can reach out to the banks. It can take sometimes days if it's fast or immediate, but sometimes it can take way longer, right? Especially when it's cross-border and they need to reach out to other FIUs so that the other FIUs will reach out to their financial institutions. So it's crazy. And we know that when somebody's laundering money, it's very fast. They want to move the money around as fast as possible. So that would be, first of all, the impact of lack of GDPR and data sharing regulations, the quality of the SARs for sure. And if we could ask other, then probably the FIU work would be a little bit easier in terms of freezing the funds. And actually, because the ultimate goal of the FIU is to freeze the funds, to stop the crime, to hit the criminals when it hurts, so in the pocket.
Absolutely. Siri?
Yeah, I totally agree with Daniel here that the quantity would go down and the quality would rise with the SARS, because it could as well be that, the client didn't reply and didn't give any answers. It could just be that the mail went into the junk mailbox and maybe he or she was traveling and couldn't pick up the phone or whatever could have happened. And then there's suspicious activity. We didn't get the response. But if I would ask it from the other bank, I instantly get the reply and I have the information what is needed. I don't have to file this SAR. But if there's really something suspicious, I would have much better quality SAR for the FIU.
Nick?
I mean, yeah, I'm fully aligned on that as well. I mean, something I touched on earlier as well, that obviously the scope for higher quality SARs and STRs is massive, and that would be very beneficial. A word of caution maybe on the other hand is that even if we imagine all of the regulatory constraints away and the data protection legislation away, I think a real risk that exists with all of this data sharing is the risk of market abuse, of the abuse of this data being shared by malicious actors within banks. You know, people are very ingenious with that sort of thing. High frequency traders in the noughties used maps of the internet lines around New York and New Jersey, how long it exactly would take a piece of data to reach an exchange and come back, to figure out what actors were which banks, and could then manipulate, or not manipulate, but basically trade from an advantageous position, because they were able to map this out and have this knowledge from an insane idea, really. So, I mean, it reinforces the point, people are very clever, and, you know, even with all of that gone, we need to be very mindful of who gets that data, and again, why we share it, need to know basis, all of that sorts of things. Are not to end on a negative note, but I just thought that throw in some words of caution there as well.
Yeah, you really need to choose your co-workers, right? So that's make sure that you do proper background research. But that just reminded me what you brought out, Nick, is that I used to work as a diplomat in Brussels, and then we had kind of a confidential meeting talking about possible listing of a terrorist entity to the terrorist list. And before we got out of the room, Harets already had the news out, and pretty well kind of declaring which country said what and who is pro and who is con. So yeah, you have to watch out with whom and what you're sharing and why.
I remember a similar story when I was doing an investigation, and some Russian oligarchs were sanctioned, and day before the sanctions were implemented, the full ownership has changed. So we couldn't sanction the company anymore because the owner wasn't there. But as a wish list, and what would be the impact if we wouldn't have those kind of strict GDPR and governance rules? Paradoxically, I think that it might improve the user experience, because instead of bothering the customer each time, we can reach out to our counterpart and in another financial institution and ask some additional questions, right? Of course, that might create a volume for them, right? But from a user experience, it can be quite beneficial, right? We want to, where did the customer funds originated from, right? And they probably did the background check, verified, could see the transaction and could let us know, right? So those are the benefits that I'm also thinking about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, actually. I hear a lot about kind of more training that's needed for like the first line of defense. So that they're not just asking those very standard questions to the customers, like, do you know this person? Well, yes, I know this person. I've been talking to them on a dating app for 2 years. I don't know that they're a, criminal. Of course, I just think they're a nice person. But yeah. Okay, just in the last couple of minutes that we've got, I want to touch very quickly on something that you said, Siri, about working with the local police force in Estonia to share some information to add kind of more intelligence, I suppose, to the investigations. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Well, I don't even remember how it came to there that they decided to join Silent Bridge, but it's the trust that we have built amongst each other, that we know each other, we meet regularly as well. It's not that you're just, and not everybody in the second defense line even sees the reports or the information shared with them. So you have to have clear cuts and really the need to know basis and who sees what and why. But it's otherwise it's like really efficient. If I ask a question, I've never waited for the next day for them to reply to me. And vice versa. If they send a request of information, for example, would you kindly have a look at the card payment data within certain period of time, if there are any payments made by any of your client to certain district, for example, somewhere, then of course I do it straight away because I want to know if there could be terrorist financing going on in my bank that I want to prevent.
Absolutely. It sounds like my magic wand has already been waved over there of, that level of trust that you have, the no regulatory kind of barriers and, all of the information being shared for good purpose. We have like 1 minute left. Is there any kind of final thoughts from anybody?
Ask why and start sharing.
I really like that during today's conference we had different interpretations of KYC. So we have the know your client, we have know your criminal, and now we have know your coworker also in the terms of data sharing.
That's brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We give everyone give the panel a round of applause.
Much for a really insightful discussion. By sharing your experience and examples, you truly demonstrated how intelligence sharing is and, first of all, could be to combat financial crime. Now, please join me in welcoming Bartosz Michałkowski to the stage, who will provide closing remarks and wrap up today's event.
Thank you, and thank you guys for, you can stay, you can leave, it's up to you. Thank you very much. I don't have that much to share, to be honest, and I know it's difficult to attract everyone's attention at the end of the day, so I'm pleased that no one rushed through the door yet. I will take 2 of your minutes, maybe 3. First of all, maybe acting first on or borrowing the last panel theme, collaboration, not competition. I think I like it in the spirit of today's conference. This is the 5th time we managed to bring together companies or entities who on the day-to-day basis might be considered as competing with each other, but I'm glad that they come together and exchange information and collaborate together to prevent financial crime or to educate each other how to be better. In terms of some stats, I'm due to share that online we managed, or throughout the day, we have over 2,000 participants. So thank you, or entries, I should say. So thank you for everyone who took time to join us today. And I think the biggest thank you for our hosts who were patiently running us through the order and making sure we are not late with our sessions. And lastly, but the most importantly, thank you all the panelists and everyone who has took time to present today or to join any session. Some of them traveled long distance. So thank you very much for your time. And hopefully, I think this is a very big statement. See you next year. Thank you. Bye-bye.